All right, well, we're going to get going. Hopefully you guys have the slides accessible and in front of you. My name is Dave DeGrossi. We were going to talk about the One Tray today. We're going to discuss a little bit about it, the technology behind it, and what I did for implementation at my facility. And you can see on the title of the slides here, we were saying that this is the first breakthrough in about 40 years. Container technology has been around since about the 1950s, and the most recent updates to that type of technology was probably around 1971. I wanted to congratulate you guys. I was just in Prague at the World Forum. I was with some of your counterparts, and it seems like you guys got the bid for the World Forum to be in Brisbane in 2016, so congratulations on that. As a side note, I will also be out in with Grace Lund out in Townsville in North Queensland in August of next year. She invited me to come speak at the conference that they're having out there. So who knows, maybe I'll be able to meet with some of you one-on-one. But if we go into the next slide, you'll see a little shot of my bio and some of my background. I work at Middlesex Hospital in Connecticut in the United States. It's as a manager in central processing. I was the president of our state chapter, which is part of ISHM, the International Association, and there is about 63 chapters in ISHM throughout the U.S. and a couple global. And I held that role for quite a while, and I've been involved with our state chapter for quite a long time, really since the mid-90s. I also am involved with AAMI, Association for Advancement of Medical Instrumentation, as a voting member on ST79, the work group 40, a group that puts together the ST79 is what I like to refer to as kind of the Bible of Central Sterile. It covers everything from department design through staffing, and then it gets into each specific area of processing. As I mentioned, I'm involved with the ISHM. We have an orthopedic council, which helps really look at all of the loaner processes around vendor drop-offs and spinal equipment and orthopedic equipment. We try to set that up as a group that is really a liaison for industry to try to, if they reach out and they need some experts in either design or capability of what the department does. It's been very successful. If you look on the ISHM website, which is isham.org, we've done a lot of work on a template. There's a loaner policy out there that's a suggested policy or a guideline policy. More recently, they developed a drop-off log so that when these vendors drop equipment off to the department, there's a suggested log for managing those loaner trays once they hit the door and how they go through your process. So it's a very good group, A lot of hard work being done there. ISHM is made up, like I said, of 63 chapters, and that is really the board of ISHM. Obviously, the strength of ISHM is the membership. There's about 23,000 members, and they do provide certification. And in order to make things work on a regular basis, we have an executive board, which is made up of 4 of those presidents, of the 63 chapter presidents. Because as you might imagine, it takes a little bit of it would be very difficult for 63 people to move day-to-day business along. So those 4 representatives to the executive board have to represent all 63 chapter presidents, which represent the 23,000 members. So I was involved with the executive board for 2 terms, and right now I am currently the president-elect. I'll be coming in as president in May of next year at our annual conference in Fort Lauderdale in Florida in the United States. If we go over to the next slide, just a little background on my hospital. It's a 300-bed hospital, as I mentioned, in Connecticut in the United States. We have 10 operating rooms with 3 off-site and a surgical center. And we are responsible for that surgical center. We have a separate little processing area set up with the technician that works there. 18 full-time folks in that department. We do a case cart system, meaning we supply all of the supplies to surgery except for the drugs and suture. And we like to kiddingly say that the number of complaints is 0 because we tick that pole on 3rd shift when no one's there. We're not a trauma center. We don't go 24 hours. We actually go on call. But we do our fair share of spine and orthopedic surgery. If we go to the next slide, we realize that Australia is adapting the AAMI guidelines, ST79, and we wanted to just put up here the definition out of AAMI for terminal sterilization. And you can see that on the bottom of the slide. That's in section 2.133. It's a process whereby product is sterilized within its sterile barrier system. And that's important to just state, because as we start to put our heads around what this technology does, a lot of times people get confused with terminal sterilization versus what the dry time does. The dry time is literally doesn't have anything to do with the actual sterilization of the device, and but just sometimes people intermingle the two, and we wanted to define that there. If we go over to the next slide, you'll see hopefully a picture of the one tray, and we put up here that it's a truly sealed container. There's a lot of technology that is behind this device. As a for instance, without getting too far ahead of ourselves, if you look at the upper lid on the container itself, you can see the black gasket around that upper lid of the tray itself. The latch mechanism that's on this container is designed to clamp that lid down to the container about 1 to 2 millimeters. No other container really does that. It doesn't on the market today. This container system that's designed around it truly make this container impervious or impenetrable to water, either from the inside out or the outside in. That's water in a liquid state, not in a vapor state. One of the kind of unofficial tests we do in the department, on a department level, is we clamp a sheet of paper down on the edge of the container and then put the lid down, and then you try to pull the piece of paper out from underneath the container. You really cannot do that with this container. You have to tear the sheet of paper before you can get it out. But I would challenge you guys to do that with your existing container technology, and you could easily pull the sheet most of the time out from the container with that simple test. You can see the plate system over there on the left. So the plate system is essentially what you pick up for the container. You put that inside the container, and if you look at the base of the container, there's little channels that go all around the filter plate system. That is really designed where any liquid moisture that's retained in the device will end up in those channels. But in my testing and in other testing, very rarely do I have any liquid water on the instruments themselves. If you go to the next slide, we kind of put the question up there, why do wrap technologies and other containers require dry or cool times? And the reason for that really is sterility maintenance. Obviously, it's a whole other world when what we refer to as wrapped items, whether it's polypropylene or whether a facility is still doing the reusable. We don't want liquid water left over in those types of technologies because it can allow for contaminants to enter and exit the package from the inside out and from the outside in. If the water can migrate from the inside to the outside, obviously there's going to be contamination. Even in the world of containers, like we mentioned, with these 40-year-old devices, it could become a problem because the design of their locking mechanisms and their the filter systems that they're using could allow for the water to come from the outside in and also carry with it the contaminants. So, therefore, they want their devices to obviously be dry from the time that they come out of the sterilizer. This way there's not the chance for contamination. If you go to the next slide, you'll see a profile of the one tray, and what you'll see on that is the airflow in the device itself, with the way that the steam comes in and the way that the air comes out of the container. The design of the container itself allows for this increased airflow, and you can see that here on the slide. It allows the steam to quickly reach the lateral edges of the tray. The other containers out there require these extended cycles because they struggle to move the steam through the edges of the container, and you just get very, very good airflow through this system. The staggered venting allows the angled floor, and the angled floor allows for more efficient flow also. So you get a greater volume of air and a volume of movement through the container system itself, which allows for that efficient drying, if you will, sterilization, and then removal of any steam or vapor that's left over in the container system itself. I like to mention, we're talking about the container that when I speak with Scott Cohen, the president of the company, the container itself and the way that the system is designed can actually take this container with its filters in place and place it in a swimming pool, and it will float. You could put water on these on the filters themselves, and you can see the water bead on them. You could let it sit there for an hour. It will not penetrate or migrate through the filter. So it just helps you kind of visually grasp it in your mind of why this device is different than anything else that's been on the market. If we go over into the next slide, we will talk about some of the questions that we put up here based on my experiences. So just hang on one second, folks. My battery is giving me a little trouble here on my phone. I'm going to grab my charger. So the first question here is, why did we look at this technology? So in my facility, we were faced with what seems to be a global problem of, not enough equipment to the surgeries that we were performing. And that, therefore, caused a lot of issues with what we call immediate use, or what we used to call flashing of instruments, or rapid turnaround of instruments. This is a practice that we measure and define in our quality systems in the hospital. We report it out to quality because it's not that it's suboptimal. If done correctly, it's a fairly effective process. But the problem is, as you all know, in the old model of immediate use, and with these old container systems, you had a lot of retained moisture left over in the sets. And the retained moisture in those types of systems could lead to contamination of the sets or the devices. So that was an issue for us. We wanted to try to offset some of the cost savings rather than buying additional spinal sets or additional orthopedic sets, we said, what if there was a technology out there in the market that would allow us to greater utilize the existing sets that we had? And that's what the tray allowed us to do. Some of the issues we had to resolve was education, obviously, and kind of getting our hands around the whole concept of what this technology does, what it's capable of, and working with the operating room and our infection control department, and explaining the technology and helping to have them understand how the system works and what we were actually trying to achieve. What do we do to verify the product claims made by the OneTray system? Obviously, there's a lot of testing data that the company can provide. There's a lot of information in their instructions for use. But what we did in our facility was that we followed in the AAMI document, there is a lot of guidance in regards to product testing. Specifically with new rigid containers, there's a lot of pre-purchase evaluation guidance in there. And then there's also periodic product testing, which in AAMI allows you to do that in a system where you test product families. So we did some internal testing right in our facility. That's all laid out in the AAMI document without going into too much detail on it. But we essentially took containers and we tested them without instrumentation in it. We put some biological indicators, some chemical indicators in them, ran them through our process to verify if we had a kill, and it came back obviously very positive. And then beyond that, we put some instrument sets, some product configurations that were typical of what we would be doing into the OneTray along with the chemical and biological indicators, and tested that out as well. And we had great results with that also. Some of the concerns that the staff had and how were they overcome. It's obviously the wetness, if there is any wetness left over. My experiences on probably about 99% of my trays were that, like I said, there was never any wetness or retained moisture on any of the instrumentation. Some of the times we would open up, you got to understand, we were opening up during our product testing these containers immediately after they came out of the sterilizer. So we would look underneath that plate system, and sometimes there would be a couple of droplets of retained moisture. So what we covered that certainly after we let that sit on the cart and go through its normal dry time or cool down time, that any retained moisture would end up venting off, turning into vapor and venting off through the filter. But we wanted to make sure that the OR and that the staff upstairs understood that this in no means meant that it was contaminated in any way, that it was essentially sterile water in nature. If they happen to send something up rapidly and needed it immediately turned over. Our biggest concern was actually making sure that when we had these quick turnovers, that they allowed the instruments to cool, or they had a system in place to cool the instruments so that that larger, heavier metal instruments weren't a danger to the patient, because that's how fast we were able to turn these instruments over. So they still had to make sure that they didn't put a hot instrument on the patient. But it really was through education and talking about the difference, like we're talking about on this conference call today, about what this new technology allows us to do. So the way that we implemented it into our processes, obviously our big target was this immediate use. By definition, we no longer perform immediate use as defined in our guidelines. We worked this out, like I said, with our infection control department and our operating room. We meet all the parameters. We're following the container manufacturer's instructions for use. We're following the instrument manufacturer's instructions for use, and obviously our autoclaves instructions for use. and we no longer have to report that out to infection control. So essentially, 0% immediate use or flash rate, as people like to call it, because of the technology. What we also did was we have a pool of containers available. We did some product testing with the loaner trays that come in for the orthopedic cases. So we have a nice pool of containers available so that when those containers when those loaner systems come to our facility, we configure them the way we tested them and we actually containerize them. Most of those loaner tray systems, as you guys know, are wrapped, and we had a very, very bad problem of holes in the wrappers and wetness inside. And as we stated earlier, wetness in a wrap tray is a whole different animal. So we decided to do the testing. We implemented the one trays. When those sets come in, we put them in the one trays. And the nice thing is that with the 30-day shelf life, our policy says that we want those trays in 48 hours before the surgery. So it works out very well for us. And in many instances, they're crazy over here sometimes in the States, but I'm sure they're crazy all over the world. These loaner companies or the doctors will bring in sometimes 25 trays for a bilateral knee setup. If we don't use all of those trays, if we don't use those or open those trays for that particular procedure, we maintain the sterility and send those downstairs and then turn those trays over for the procedure that's going to happen either the next day or later on in that week. So it really does allow us to utilize the instrumentation we have in a much more efficient manner. Some of those immediate benefits have been additional cases we're able to perform without the purchase or acquisition of very expensive equipment, additional trays. We have a quicker turnaround time and obviously less frustrated surgeons. There is some, as you can see down below there, the long-term benefits are cost savings. If you think about the way that the sterilizer works, when we're running all these trays in there, with my typical cycles in the hospital that I'm in are for the steam parameters are 4 minutes of exposure time with 45 minutes of dry time. That just was what worked for our facility, and now with this system, like I mentioned, when we get those 25 trays dropped off, and we run these one trays through the autoclave system, we're eliminating that 45 minutes of dry time. That's a significant amount of not only electricity and time savings for the department, but if you're familiar with the way that a sterilizer works, during the dry time, typically the autoclave is pulling a vacuum, and it's pulling a vacuum and holding those instruments in a vacuum state for a set period of time. The way that the autoclaves typically pull that vacuum is through a Venturi system, through running water over a Venturi valve, which creates that vacuum. I just know, for instance, my Getinge sterilizers in the hospital typically can use upwards of about 300,000 gallons of water a year. So there's a lot of water going down your drain for that 45-minute cycle to maintain that vacuum. So you can imagine the savings involved just from a processing standpoint. If we go over to the next page, there's a couple of more bullets. Some of the initial early results. Staff satisfaction increases with just one protocol and a very simplistic system. And that means, we had different devices, and we had a Riley flash pack. We had these different devices that the OR used to kind of own that process. When we implemented these, we were able to now perform this function down in Central Sterile, where I personally feel that it belongs, We're the experts in sterilization, so when a device needed a quick turn, our policy read that the instrument needed to be properly cleaned, which means it had to come to Central. So the devices were already down in Central. Now we were able to put them into the one tray, process them in our sterilizers downstairs, and provide that item back to the OR in a sterile manner with a quick turn. So the sterilizers essentially in the OR, what we affectionately call the flashers, or the immediate use sterilizers, really do now sit up there unutilized in our facility. And obviously you have the experts, like I say, doing it and documenting it, and just for tracking and tracing purposes, we're monitoring that all downstairs. The manpower efficiency increased in prepping instruments for the autoclave. It's much faster using the one tray versus wrapping them. Like I said, especially when we would get the 25-pan drop-offs. The ability to handle last-minute problems that arise. We still have folks drop things, or one-of-a-kinds hit the floor. Very fast turnover, so that turning instruments and implants over in about 20 minutes, which just takes the autoclave that long to go through the exposure phase. A reduction of costs has been identified, going from wrap to the one tray. Like I mentioned earlier, you don't have the probability or the chance or the of tears in the wrappers, which or wetness retained inside of them, which really is it decreased to zero. The time using the autoclave, like we mentioned, is decreased by about 60%. And I'm still capturing data on that, so we could put some hard numbers around it in at least U.S. dollars. If we go over to the next page, that's continued. On the next slide, the general turnaround time of instruments was reduced by about 66%. No dry and cooling times. So, like I mentioned, that whole 45-minute cycle is reduced out of the equation. The surgeons like the fact that we can be proactive rather than reactive, so that we're essentially providing them a 100% sterile device, whereas in the past that wasn't always a guarantee, if you will. We're still identifying those other efficiencies and dollar savings. Long term, we're trying to quantify all that, and we'll share those results as I get them online. And on the next slide, it says, thank you for your time. I appreciate your time. Just forgive me if my voice is a little groggly. It's 3 o'clock in the morning over here in the States, and I wanted to thank One Tray, number one, for coming out with a really great device, but also for letting me share my experiences with you guys, because I've been doing that here in the States as well, and a lot of folks have had a lot of great outcomes with adopting this technology. So we're going to leave the floor open here for any questions that you guys may have.
Mr. Parkman, if you want to take the phone off mute and ask us any questions.
Any questions?
How many? David?
Yes, hello.
How many containers do you put in per load per sterilizer?
Could somebody repeat that, because it was chopping up a little bit.
No worries. She wants to know how many containers your sterilizer holds when you make a run.
I have getting 733s, which they're not floor loaders, but the funny thing with the sterilizers is this. You got to look at the instructions for use for your sterilizer, because they do define how many trays you can put in the autoclave at once. Because I like to say that because I believe my getting a unit says that I could put 20 16-pound trays in it at one time. But, you know, my great technicians can probably fit about 48 trays in the autoclave. So we always try to follow that IFU because it's based on metal mass. You don't want to overload a sterilizer with any kind of products, because you could create too much moisture where the autoclave just isn't capable of drying the rest of those packages. But typically on my autoclave, I'm just trying to visualize it right now. I could typically fit about 12 trays because I have 3-level racks that go into my autoclave.
Average weight per tray load?
What's your average weight per tray load?
It's they're under 25 pounds. They're probably on the higher end of that. They're usually over 20 pounds because of their orthopedic systems and spine systems. And that's in the AAMI document. In 2005, AAMI said that the trays should be no heavier with the containment device, no heavier than 25 pounds.
So he's trying to load light to heavy with containers. Still trying to.
And unfortunately, AAMI, the term we call grandfathers. There still are devices out on the market that are over 25 pounds. I have them. They're in the United States. So when AAMI comes out with a new standard, it's always from that date moving forward. So from 2005 moving forward, any devices that they approved in the U.S. couldn't be over 25 pounds. But they don't make manufacturers go back beyond that to reconfigure the existing trays. So that's why we kind of have these mixed weights all over the place.
And what's the size of the chamber in the sterilizer? How many litres?
Do you know how many liters your sterilizer chamber is?
Well, in U.S. it's a 60-inch chamber.
2.2. There was a question as to what instruments. Probably the better question is, what instrumentation have you not run in the one tray, or will you not run in the one tray?
There really is no devices that we won't run. The way we kind of conceptually look at it is that if we put the hardest devices as part of the product testing, if we're testing the product families of the most difficult to clean and sterilize devices in the tray, such as these sophisticated spine sets and the really complicated orthopedic sets, then anything below that type of set is not a problem. So in other words, if I product tested my my 3-leveled, very sophisticated spine set, I don't have any issues with running like a minor tray or my basic instrument sets in the device, because I know it was very effective with those other more complicated trays.
Hold 1 second, Dave. Yes, ma'am.
Sure.
The question is, Dave, have you had a tray on the shelf that was on the shelf for the shelf life of 30 days, and when you opened it, did it have moisture in it?
No, we have not had that experience because, like I said, if there was any moisture left over, it does evaporate. It does vent off in that time that it sits on the shelf. It's typically when it's more on the rapid side of things, when you send up a device, it would be underneath the plating system, but the bigger concern at that point is just make sure you're not putting a hot instrument on the patient. You have to just still allow a little bit of time for cool down of the devices, because that's how rapid a turnover you can have with these devices.
Question is, was part of educating the staff that the moisture, if it's any retained moisture, it's okay?
Yes, it's sterile. And do you know what a great way of explaining that was? That was under the old practice, under the old system that we were using. If we were using an Aesculap container and it went upstairs to the operating room and there was a droplet of moisture in the bottom of the container, we would ask them to think about that. And we would say, you would typically say that was contaminated. Then what they would do is they would say, we need to immediate use that tray. We need to turn it over. So we would, under the old design, we would use the Riley flash pack. We would put it in the Riley flash pack. We would flash it, if you will, and we would give it back to the operating room with maybe 10 times the amount of moisture that it originally had on it. But somehow that was acceptable. And it really made people start thinking about it like that. With those technologies that we were using, we couldn't guarantee the sterility of that water in that container because of the design of the systems. So obviously with this technology, and the way that the container is designed, along with the filtration system, we know that that's sterile water if there is any retained moisture inside that set. And as some of you know, there's a lot of water up there. They use sterile water in the procedures. They have typically saline, betadine. There's a lot of liquids in the operating room during the surgery, a lot of sterile water and liquids.
Dave, I have another question. Hold, please. Ooh, that's a longer question I may be able to repeat. Have you considered using a tray liner across the bottom of the container? Underneath the instruments to allow the moisture to spread.
Oh, is this in the container device, you mean?
Yes.
No. I mean, because once you use the device, it does a very efficient job of, I mean, that's not in their instructions for use, but I never really considered that because I don't really have that much, like I said, 90 in the high 90 percentile, my trays are dry when I open them directly out of the autoclave, without even a cool down time. So it really wasn't a big issue. Any kind of droplet moisture I would have left over would be underneath the plating system.
Dave, there's a question as to the EN or the ISO 11607 standards as to what this would fall under on that.
I'm not as well versed with the ISO standards, so I would have to kind of look that up. I don't have the standards in front of me. But like we said, if I know at least in the AAMI documents that they're very dependent on manufacturers to give you the AAMI basically drives you to follow the manufacturer's instructions for use. And they do have a grid or a guideline in there for sterilization, but they're typically dealing with the exposure times, not really addressing the dry times. I know over here in the States, there's a couple of manufacturers that will have minimum dry times in their IFUs for some of their instrument sets. But a lot of times the reasons for that is that when they did their approvals or their sterilization testing of these devices, they did it in a blue wrap paper, not in a rigid container.
Yes, ma'am. How does he account for what? She wants to know, at your hospital, how do you account for the tray list, the checklist?
Oh, the count sheet?
Yes.
Well, we're going over to a digital system, but right now the existing paper count sheet, we have a board by the sterilizers, and the count sheets are, we affix the count sheets to the handle of the container device. We were having bad experiences with count sheets inside the trays, and it's just not we didn't think it was a great idea to have the paper in contact with the instrumentation inside the set, let alone the toners and the inks that are on those count sheets.
You'll actually see. You'll see what. Any other questions? I believe that wraps it up. Mr. Jagrosi and Mr. Billman, thank you very much.
I think,
appreciate it.
yeah, so there's no pun intended, wrapped it up or containerizes it up?
We containerized it up, I'm sorry.
I appreciate your time, and I look forward to coming out to Australia in at least next year and in 2016 with the World Forum.
Well, you showed your picture after you said that, and now the ladies that run this place want to shoot you. They were going to hold that announcement for later. So
oh no!
So Dave,
sorry guys.
They won't see you in Australia. Just kidding. Thank you very much, Dave. You guys.
All right, thank you for your time. I'm available. They'll make my information available to you. I'm available anytime you have a question. Anytime, just give me a call.
Thank you for your time, David. Thanks for attending on the phone at 3 a.m. in the morning. I believe it's over there. Really appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you all.